Hello and welcome to this episode of the Datum Podcast. Ravi, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm well. I'm not being blown away because of Storm Kiara, which I can see from my window right now, and has been like absolutely tipping it down all day. So luckily, I'm indoors all day, so I'm grand.
Amazing, amazing. I ran with I ran with Toby this morning in the wind. We wanted to get out before the rain came with the wind as
Yeah.
well. So we got out. We knew it was windy, and boy, it was windy. It was so windy. I think most of the run Toby was pulling me through, basically. It's like,
I saw a really cool tidbit this morning. So London to New York was done in record time this morning,
wow.
due to the wind. So it was 4 hours and 56 minutes on a 9-hour flight. So that was a bit ridiculous.
Literally pushing the plane along.
Exactly. And it sort of makes you think, like, hang on a second, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Like, because obviously, if I'm a pilot, I'm like, man, I could make this in sub 5, and then it's a challenge, right? So maybe it's. I wonder if pilots have that sort of ego, or whether they do think of the whole. They've got 200 passengers on board each time.
Well,
So,
it's also if they arrive 5 hours early for their landing thing, then everything at the
of
arrival end
course.
is completely messed up. So it's probably a nightmare, to be honest. And that as well, you probably not use as much fuel. So when you arrive at the destination, you have to do some basically circuits to burn the fuel that you weren't supposed to have before you land. I know this because I watched too many YouTube videos, and this is actually one of them. How basically as soon as a plane takes off, it can't just land immediately. It has to burn a certain amount of fuel before it touches down. So there you go. It's a pointless fact for the day.
There we go. I mean, luckily it's not the aviation podcast; it's data and
Absolutely,
tech. So
absolutely. But yeah, we're in episode 3 of season 3, and today we're talking about the Internet of lots of things, right?
yeah, the title comes from one of my favorite Twitter accounts, which is the Internet of Shit, basically.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic because it sort of shows you pictures of fridges with the Windows errors and all this stuff, which is
hmm
it's good fun. But then you start thinking, and there's a lot of things to talk about here and a lot of things to cover.
Right.
Let's touch on data ethics. We released that episode last week, was it? I think I was
Yep.
away on safari.
Yeah, Gwilym. Yeah, we recorded it actually before you went away, but we released it last week. And no, that was a really good episode. We had lots of sort of good feedback as well about that, and how sort of it's starting to trigger some people's thoughts on that. It also made me think a bit about sort of the way we work a little bit more. So it's really useful sort of episode to reflect on.
Yeah, I think those things are always once they're on your mind, that's the point, right? Like it's
hmm
just to make you be aware and consider it while working or doing anything that's somewhat relevant. So
Yeah, exactly. So no, very good. I encourage you to take another listen on your podcast player of choice. But what are things, Ravi? When we talk about Internet of Things, what things are we talking about?
so I think that a nice place to start here is talking about smartphones. Smartphones are the original internet of thing, the thing of the internet, right?
The original thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, because it's the original thing is such a broad concept. You'd have to go back to stonemasons and all that stuff. But
Right.
let's think about it as the concept of the original thing that connected to the internet. That wasn't a computer or personal, like a laptop or a computer, something that we had on our persons at all times. I think one of the really interesting videos I watched, which was by a guy called Marcus Brownlee, MKBHD, who's done HD review videos on YouTube since he was like 13 or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
So he did a video which was, are we at peak smartphone? And the question here is, are smartphones going to get that much better, or are we just stuck in the mud a bit? I think a really good analogy he brought into that was cars. There isn't going to be a better car. Like, okay, you can maybe talk about the Tesla Supervan and just electric cars as a different innovation, but no one would say like, okay, cool, we're at peak car. Like, I mean, a car is a car, it gets you from A to B. It's got 4 wheels and a chassis and all that stuff. But every improvement every year is marginal. I think that's where we are with smartphones. I mean, I don't think I'm upgrading my smartphone for at least another year or two. That there's no, unless there's that massive thing, I'm like, oh man, I really need that. But even then, I'm just sort of like, as long as it works, does everything I need it to, is somewhat fast and can last minimum a whole day, I'm good.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of discussion point, because when you talk about that, you're talking mostly about the hardware features, right? So the
Correct.
camera, the battery, the touch screen. There's not much more you can really squeeze into them. However, on the other hand, the software is far from at a comparable level.
Oh, 100%.
There's so many bugs that come out every year when the iOS is updated. There's some very good examples, or Android, there's some very good examples where it's very clear the software could run so much better, because for a lot of the software and technology we use today, today, the software still isn't optimized for the hardware. The hardware is moving so fast that developers don't get the chance. I think it takes a typical developer 8 months to fully incorporate features from a new OS, and then as soon as that happens, they're already looking to the beta of the next one. And so you never actually spend time in one particular phase going, what's the best I can get out of this hardware today? You don't sit in that. Whereas with cars, that does happen. You get sort of iterations of engines, and the engine isn't going to change. The design, the fundamental concept of engine isn't going to change, but they've had decades to improve and really refine the sort of way that we interact with cars to where interiors today look like people's living rooms.
Right, and you get TV screens and all sorts coming in. I think I had my first car with CarPlay in it, where you connect your phone and suddenly it's an extension. People can see my messages. I'm like, whoa, hang on a second here. I'm in a car with 4 other colleagues going across America. Anyway, so I think that really got this thought process going for me, at least. And I think it feeds in quite nicely to this conversation, because that hardware software pivot is quite important when it comes to smart devices, right?
Right, exactly. And if you start to sort of broaden the field, to things like smartwatches, which mixed reviews on those. At the moment, they're mostly notification devices and fitness devices. You've got things like Alexa and Google Home, who kind of pretending to be assistants around the house, but really all people do is chuck silly questions and make jokes out of them. And then in terms of other devices, you've got things like tile trackers, which are these Bluetooth little dongles you shove in your keys, and then when you lose your keys, it uses the power of the crowds to kind of find where your keys are. And so you've got a whole gamut of smart devices, all mostly using wireless technology of some sort in order to communicate with something else. And that's where most of the smarts has been focused on. We still don't have Google level AI, working for us on our phone, telling us that our keys are by the table, right? Like we still don't have that kind of seamless integration we promised almost a decade ago now.
Not yet. And I think having got my connected home going with the Google Home, among other devices, right? I've got Chromecast to Google Home, Nest thermostat. All of these things are sort of adding up to just making my life easier, and sort of assisting my laziness, right? And I think this is the argument I always get when I start talking about this. Is like, well, that's just making you lazy. It's like, well,
no, I disagree.
Yes.
I disagree. I fundamentally disagree. It's not about lazy. It's about the time, the amount of time you're spending doing something inane, right? So time spent not having to get up and go switch the lights on is time better spent doing something more useful. That's all it is. If you don't make use of that time, then fair enough. Joke's on you. But I think it's also about if you think of the Chromecast as a very simple example. That device is basically a stick. You plug it into the back of the TV, and now your TV has the feature it should have had 5 years ago. Right? That's basically what a Chrome stick is.
And honestly, it's made things so much easier. Like I said, it's small things like the phone rings. I need to pause the television, or Netflix. I can just say to my Google Home, pause Netflix or whatever. I can turn on the light on and off when it suddenly gets dark and starts to rain. It's small things like that. When I'm putting my shoes on, I can ask the weather so I don't have to get my phone out. And all of these tiny little things start adding up to something bigger, right?
But those should all be native features in everything you've just mentioned, right? Like they should be able to talk to each other off a common protocol and just work. I shouldn't have to put a stick so that my Chromecast can talk to something else. I bought a device to talk to another device, which I've shoved into the back of my TV. Great.
So my favorite thing, I think, is so all of these things need a Wi-Fi connection. They need some sort of network connection.
Or Bluetooth,
so most of these things you can start running off your phone. It's one of these things you scan a QR code or you get the app and install it via Bluetooth, blah 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 blah. Now for my Nest thermostat, you actually have to enter it manually, the Wi-Fi password. And oh my god, if you get your first ever it
has no keypad, so how do you do
correct
that?
Well, it's click wheel. It's click wheel. It's basically like an iPod Classic.
Like an iPod Classic. You do know Tony Fadell, who started Nest, was the creator of the click wheel design, right?
Oh, wow. There we go.
There you go. Full circle.
Very full circle. But yeah, so the first password you get with your router when you get it installed, obviously, if the smart thing to do is to change it. I've changed it to something similarly strong and long and all of this stuff. But that means it's like 25 characters with special characters, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And you're just sitting there on like click, push, scroll, clicks, push. And it's just like, man, if I have to do this again, there was a power cut where I live a couple of months ago. They cut the power when they installed like a smart thermostat or something else. And when that came through, they cut the power, which meant I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to do the click wheel again. So all of these different things, like because you have to have that network connections, mean you have to establish it and change it. And all routers now come with two-way frequencies, right? You get
Yeah.
the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz, and the difference there is range, right? So something you might get in the garden will be a 2.4 gigahertz, and your 5 gigahertz faster one you'll be getting through like the walls in your house when you're closer to the router.
Yeah.
How do you think this will change? Like how do you think that the strength of the connection and the impact of having so many devices connected to your internet will change the way we think about smart objects?
So, in order to answer this, I have to sort of step back a little bit. We talked a lot about hardware, and fundamentally, that hardware is driven by chips, and those chips are fundamentally developed by a handful of companies: Apple, Intel, Qualcomm, AMD. These are fundamentally the people who make the underlying technologies and protocols that enable these devices to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we had the advent of mobile internet, that was technically 3G. I remember the Sony Ericsson flip phone that you could watch football goals on. That was like the big thing. Watch goals on your phone, right? That was the first sort of advent of here's some data, actual data with enough bandwidth that can actually do something meaningful on the go. And then we had 4G, which fixed the next problem, which is that bandwidth isn't fast enough. Here's a little bit more bandwidth in a more reliable state that you can use to stream an entire film on the go. Okay. And, that we've only just really got to the point where mobile phone and networks are actually able to do that in a reliable way. And coverage for 4G is now just about reaching sort of, decent levels. I'm not saying it's great, but it's reaching decent levels. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, if you look at sort of the last 5 years of, I'm going to say connection. So I'm talking about Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, mobile internet, your internet at home. They all suffer from one big problem, and that's latency. You'll experience this really well if you're, for example, on a train. Get on a packed train and then try and use your phone. Okay, it's basically impossible. It will never work. And the reason
watch
is
a sports game.
Yeah, okay, I'll go to a sports stadium or stand outside a sports stadium. The reason is because so many people are connecting to the same antenna, and the noise in that sort of process is basically makes it very, very hard. Now, as soon as you move out the station, what actually ends up happening is the connection gets better and you're actually able to use stuff. But every time you stop, it gets worse. It's basically the same principle with most of technology today. It was designed for speed, but it wasn't designed for a lot of persistent sort of connections and low latency communication. If I give you another example, we talk a lot about driverless cars in society today and how they're going to work. Now, if I put a driverless car on the motorway, on the M25, that's a highway here in the UK, and you go down that motorway at 75 miles per hour, let's say you're breaking the speed limit, whatever.
Yeah.
The latency required for the car to be able to communicate thousands of data points about the cars around it, the weather, the traction on the road, the grip, changing lanes, speed, distance. All of these calculations have been being done tens of thousands of times a second, and it can do all of that. But then it can't communicate that data fast enough back to the network so that other cars know what this car that I'm driving is doing, because the latency to do that is still too slow. So the time it takes to send that information to the network and then back again is still too slow. And so where we are now is that, we've got actually the sort of convergence of a lot of technologies coming together to make that possible. So you've got Wi-Fi 6, which is actually in the latest smartphone, which is quite latest sort of iPhone and Samsung.
Yeah,
which is quite cool, but there's no routers yet that support that technology. So you've got a lot of idle technology in your smartphone today, not being used just yet. You've then got 5G, and I think 5G is a real big enabler here because it takes a concept of LTE, 4G, and basically to break it down. If I use an analogy of an Ocado, delivery driver, right?
Yeah.
He grabs your shopping. Ocado is a delivery service for food shopping here in the UK. Okay, he grabs your food. He or she grabs your food, puts it in their van, brings it to you, then goes back to the depot for each and every delivery. That's how the network works today. Okay, it can't handle too much information simultaneously. Now, where we go with 5G is that Ocado driver can actually put all the load he needs to put onto his truck on at the same time. And he can do simultaneous deliveries at the same time and arrive back at the depot at the same time with the same amount of bandwidth. And that sounds absurd and some sort of sci-fi sort of concept. But that's essentially where we're going with 5G, because it's using lots of different technologies to make that possible. And so we're now at this point where this dream we were offered 5 years ago of everything connected, is going to kind of explode beyond just Alexa at home being able to play music back to you or, set timers, for goodness sakes. I think these things are probably the most expensive timer setters. That's, I think, 90% of what I use mine for in the kitchen. And photos, basically. Photos, music, and timers. That's 90% of the use case.
Well, mine's probably connecting, like controlling TV lights and timers and I think weather. I
Yeah,
think that
exactly. What's the
weather and
weather?
timings, yeah.
Yeah. How do I get to X? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very
Mhm.
true. Very true. And so we're now at this advent where this technology is now actually coming to fruition, and it's going to take a little while because at the same time, you still have this other problem in society, which is the sunk cost of basically everything we've ever invested in, everything that isn't 5G. So to use 5G, you can't just sort of put a 5G chip in a phone and say, off you go, because as soon as you leave a city, you'll have no reception. So you have to then support 4G. And
Mhm.
again, 4G doesn't have 100% coverage yet, at least not in the UK. So then that means you also have to put 3G, but 3G isn't supported by all devices because some of those devices are still old. So you still need to have 2G in your phone as well, right? And
Yeah,
so
true.
you end up having all this innovation go into a new protocol. But in order for it to work, you still have to make a chip that does 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. And
Mhm.
so you get 5G, but the downside is that your battery life is awful because you're having to carry the load of doing 7 different types of communication on one chip, right? And so that's sort of the sunk cost problem, right? People don't want to move too quickly because then the cost to upgrade your phone, the cost to customers will be extremely high. So we end up suffering actually initially for the first 3 or 4 years where people go, oh, what's the point of 5G? I thought I was going to get this. But actually what's happening is that, you're being phased into that technology, which then worsens your impression of it, which then means it doesn't get as well adopted and people don't move to it quickly enough. So you've got this sort of weird dynamic sort of working against each other. But I think we are genuinely at the point where this is going to explode. And more importantly, that's going to have a big impact on the data that we see being available to businesses and everyone around us today.
Right. I think the really important point you touched on there is just how everyone's going to adopt it, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the tangible benefits people will see within the first sort of year? Like, but I think that the same was when 4G came out. The same was
Right.
when 3G came out the first time, right? Everyone was like, yeah, but why do I bother with 4G? I don't even have 3G where I am. It's
Yeah,
like, well,
exactly.
well, within a year, it was everywhere was just about on 4G, and the second you hit a 3G network or you're on a train or something, you're like, oh my god, this is so slow.
Yeah.
You get used to that sort of change. I think what's really important, your thing you mentioned there on 5G, is the latency and the speed at which you'll get information back.
Right. Right.
Because, like, let's take real-time traffic for example. So you can pay TomTom for that service,
Mm-hmm.
and many people do, or you can look at Google Maps, and Google
Mm-hmm.
Maps uses every other, well, basically every Android user, full stop, like
Mm-hmm.
regardless, like if you turn it on or off or whatever. So every Google Android user, as well as any other user using Google Maps at that moment in time, to simulate traffic, right? To say that there's a lot of traffic here because we can spot a lot of phones here.
Yeah.
I think you showed me this article where one guy walked, what was it, like 100 smartphones across a bridge.
Yeah, exactly. It was like an artist. He put 100 smartphones in a trolley, literally in a trolley the size of a bucket, like a tiny
Mm-hmm.
bucket, and he put it in a trolley because it's quite heavy. And then he opened Google Maps on every single one of them and routed them to a certain point so that they'd stay running in the background. Then he
Uh-huh.
wheeled the trolley around on the road. And what that did is it created artificial traffic jams because Google uses phone data on the road to figure out traffic.
Right,
So
exactly.
exactly. So according to Google, there were 100 cars at this freeway, but he was taking pictures of himself with literally no one around him because surprise, surprise, Google was routing everyone away from these roads because it thought there were 100 cars and just in a
Exactly.
procession going around town.
And we don't even consider these things when we actually we're looking at traffic trends, right? We're just like, oh
Right.
man, I'll take a different route because it'll be quicker. And Google tells you, let
Yeah.
me route you to something where you'll get there 5 minutes faster.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
all of those things will be better, right?
Yeah, exactly, and they'll be smarter as well. And the other thing about this is that the just improving the quality of the connection makes certain technologies even more possible that weren't before. I'll give you a
Mm-hmm.
simple example.
Go
I
for it.
currently have a PC on my desk. It's a pretty powerful PC. I use it for gaming. I use it for video editing. Now, I only built it a month ago, but for 7 months prior to that, I actually was renting a PC from a company in France called Shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they basically rent PC, I'm going to say PC hardware to you, and they stream the screen to wherever you are, in the world. And so what that means is I don't actually have to pay the high costs to build a custom PC, but I can still enjoy, high quality gaming with people all around the world without having to build a PC. And I can do this on my mobile phone, my laptop, which doesn't have the specs to do any gaming, and
Mm-hmm.
they rely on a really strong, good internet connection in order to do that. Now, with low latency internet connections, those kind of possibilities become even easier because it's a concept called edge computing, where basically you move the computational task not away from your local device, so your laptop, and you move it to the cloud. And then there's certain sort of activities stay on your local device. So for example, in that example, my keyboard and my mouse movements are captured locally, right? Because I'm the one playing the game. They can't do that in the cloud. They can't predict where I want to go. Although apparently Google are doing that with their service, where they can predict what moves you're about to make and then make the graphics render faster because they can figure out sort of where you're going. It's some weird concept, right? But anyway, I'll come back to later. So edge computing allows for this sort of possibility to bring the cloud closer to people and to make it faster and sort of more capable, which again opens up new possibilities for everyone.
I think the other thing alongside like low latency computing is the power. So like the amount of power used will be much lower. So I think it's Wi-Fi 6 and 5G will allow you to actually have like almost a computer will be on or a smart device will be on, but it won't use as much power as it usually does in order to perform the service or give the service, which is so important for sort of running electricity costs, for impact on networks, and also just the overheads are so much cheaper to do that sort of thing, right? So
exactly. It's much more sort of economical, and it's funny because these things sort of add up, right? If you take a football stadium again, if everyone's running Wi-Fi on their phone and connected to the stadium Wi-Fi, just think how much energy is being used simultaneously in our pockets, right? You've got many reactors in our pockets, right? That's what a battery is basically.
and then add on to that, like if once you have Wi-Fi, people are gonna be like, man, imagine if I could charge my phone at the football game that I'm paying 50 quid to see.
Exactly.
All of these things start to really quickly add up, right? Like as in, why can't I charge my phone? Blah blah blah. Gets more and more expensive. But I think you also, when we talked about hardware, I think you also mentioned earlier on about the trade-off. So better hardware maybe is better, more energy efficient as well. But to have more powerful hardware, you will need more power. So I think what you almost get to a scenario of happening is instead of your power being used to power the Wi-Fi, that power then gets rerouted and reused into a better performance, probably via the hardware.
Exactly.
Would that sort of follow?
Yeah, that absolutely follows. So if you take a simple take a smartphone, that's basically the most easy example to explain. Any battery power that's used to keep the Wi-Fi persistent is battery not being used by the CPU, and everything is a coefficient of power. So the CPU in your smartphone could do more things if it had more power. If you took the chip out of your iPhone and you plugged it into a motherboard which had a wall plug, you could run that CPU probably 3 times faster than its current speed because it's being limited by the battery, not by its capability, not by the power. So the trick with a smartphone is having it use very little electricity while still being able to do high computational tasks. If you don't have that limitation, you can do so much more with it. The iPad is a good example. If you take the iPad Pro at the moment, that is faster than the base model iPad Pro is faster than the base model MacBook Pro of equivalent price, because the ARM chip is just so much better at handling power, and its efficiencies there just work way better. But when you give it a battery the size of an iPad, it's suddenly able to do things even faster. Like it renders 4K faster than my powerful PC can render 4K. I actually did that test. I took a video, very basic video, and I said, okay, I'd like you just to output this video in 4K, no processing, just re-render this in 4K. And the iPad did it in I think it was 30 seconds, and my powerful PC took about a minute to do the same thing. Now, okay, the iPad's optimized for that particular procedure because it's got a special chip in it, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's got a special customization that allows it to use low power and be efficient whilst doing that high computational task.
I also want to talk about software here as well. So the software we use on these internet connected devices, on dedicated devices that are like an iPad, that are purely optimized for the task it has to do, as in it is based on the app you have open right now as to how much resource it's using, right? All of those different things add up, right? So the fact that software and the post-processing, that will continue to improve, I think is why we'll see more and more people start to use connected home devices. I'm going to go back to one of our first points, which is talking about, the smartwatches. They're probably the most, what's the word? Most prevalent. No, not exciting. I wouldn't say.
Okay,
most prevalent new Internet of Things wearables tech that's actually being used. Right. I think the big thing there, as you said, a lot of people have Apple Watches, Garmin's, fitness trackers, Fitbits, whatever. I think the things you're starting to notice now is two. So first, it's getting cheaper. Alongside the cost of connected home devices like smart speakers. So, for example, I think over Christmas it was like a tenner for a Google Home Mini. Once you have one, you then get like the rest of your every other room.
Every room has one. Yeah,
exactly. That's the way they get you, as it were. The second thing there is cost, as well as it's getting nicer. It's getting the stuff you can do on these devices is getting more and more prevalent. Having something on your wrist where you can say set a timer for 15 minutes is still about 5 to 10 seconds faster than getting your phone out and having to do the app.
Right.
But think about when I think about connected time, I don't really think about the laziness as much as is referred to me as, but I think it as something that's augmenting my life. So, for example, if I'm in the kitchen, if I had or was it the Google Show, or no, say Amazon Show with the Google, one with the screen, Nest Hub, exactly. That allows you to see recipes and watch videos of cooking, right?
I've got one.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing would be smart fridges. This was probably my favorite Internet of Shit. One of the first ever innovative smart fridges, which had the Windows XP era blue screen of death on it, and it's quite funny because it's a fridge.
Yeah.
But then when you start thinking about, well, how would this work in practice? Well, a smart fridge would probably have, in a 5 to 10 years time, a transparent screen which allows you to peek inside your fridge. You probably might end up having sensors in there which can start spotting what's going off and what you need to use soon. It would probably have some sort of connection to your grocery store, so you can quickly add something to your basket or to your shopping list. And you can also probably have like, oh, I want to cook fajitas this week. What do I need to buy that's not in my fridge? It gives you a recipe, click, list, and then when you want to buy fajitas, it will tell you where everything is, how much stock you've got left of all your different food items, and then it would then communicate to your smart screen, and your thing to show you the recipe, etc., right? So it starts to augment your life rather than do something where you're in a scenario of you're just doing it because you're lazy, right?
Yeah. We're kind of in the halfway house at the moment with all of that stuff. So if I take some of your examples, meal delivery services, not Deliveroo and Uber, but I'm talking things like HelloFresh and Gusto. They already kind of, you choose a recipe and they send it to you in a box, and they've proven that can actually work. I've had one of those now for a year and 2 months, and that system is reliable. I've only ever had the delivery go missing once, and the food arrives fresh as anything, iced really, really well. And boom. So they've proven that model. All that needs to happen now is that instead of me going online every week and choosing what I want, some intelligence, like you say, where it's able to look at the fridge and just time the delivery so that, okay, looks like your fridge is running low. Let's send a delivery now, and it has 3 meals this week rather than 4, because we noticed in your calendar that you're all out 3 nights tonight. Whereas at the moment I have to go in and, me and Brie have to go in and, preemptively, a week before, right? Okay, yeah, we're going to be out twice that night. Well, sometimes we have this dilemma where it comes, we forgot that we're going to be busy that week. We end up having to cook the food so it doesn't go off, and then we end up eating it for lunch because you're kind of in this like weird position where you have to get through the food because you have it. And so that's where we need to get to next, right? Where these things kind of offer a level of intelligence that I think isn't far-fetched, right? It's not like we want it's not like we want it to make the food for us. It's not like we wanted to look at our fridge and tell us that we're obese or something like that, right? We're just asking for a little bit of intelligence to sit around these services. Amazon, the same, for example, they have those dash buttons. Again, you just want a little bit of intelligence after you've clicked that dash button 3 times, just to say, you know what, we've looked at the last 3 clicks and we figured out that you use this product every 2 months. So we'll send it to you every 2 months without you even asking. Okay.
I think that also lends itself to things like we do, pricing and promotions. Imagine if you're able to get smart pricing and smart promotions based on that, right? Like, it knows you're using it 3 weeks, but hey, you've bought it so many times from us. Here's 50% off your next order. Right.
Tesco do something similar, but they post it to you.
Exactly. That's if you use your club card as well on those products.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's kind of interesting where this is all going to go. I think where it has a really interesting sort of impact on the work we do in analytics is the data. And the real big thing here is, up until at least for the next 2 to 3 years, most of the data that's created comes out or is derived from a human activity. So a transaction on Amazon, checking into an event, purchasing something. Those are all triggered by human behaviors in some way or form. And where we are now is that these connected devices can actually, do what they were promising to do 3 or 4 years ago because of a better network infrastructure to support it. And you're going to have this explosion of data that's created by machines. And by that, I mean, HelloFresh looking at my calendar and then making a decision based off that without me being involved in that, right? You're going to get 3 or 4 data points from that one activity. And if you go even further to things like driverless cars or stock intake being done dynamically through RFIDs and stuff like that, you're going to get so much more event data about every single thing that we do today that it's going to literally cause an explosion in sort of the analysis that I think a lot of businesses have been wanting to do. Because the current problem is you get a piece of data, and in business, it always seems that you collect the data just the grain above, just where you need it to be, right? You need a transaction at the customer level, but for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, it's been aggregated up, and you can't disaggregate it because the person you buy that data from, like Kantar, doesn't do that, right? They give you the aggregated version of that picture. And so with real-time analytics and real-time networks, this is actually possible. You can actually get that information about, how many chocolate bars did I sell today?
Yeah, exactly, and that speeds up the events that and the analysis that you're able to do off the back of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
However, the
Go on.
big, I think, trade off. I think we're at the now what part after talking
Yeah.
about what and the so what, right?
Yeah.
The big now what is the data privacy, right?
Right.
So this is both on hardware, so it's in the actual physical device as well as the software.
Right.
So we talked about this the peak smartphone and the fact that smartphones will only get better and smarter in software. But everyone who has a phone, an Android phone or an iPhone, will be able to do this on their photos. So if you go to the native Photos app and you search for pictures of me with hats or pictures of hats or just search hats, for example, you will Google or iOS will be able to scan all your photos and give you those pictures because it's the software is smart enough, and as that trade-off of we'll store your photos, it's then just scanning them to help you. This is what software thinks it's doing to help you find that out. Now, for a lot of people, that is scary and they don't want that to be shared. For example, the fact that the connected home devices, either be it Alexa or Google Home or even the HomePod, are always somewhat listen for the trigger phrase. And all the stories about Amazon having people transcribing conversations, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
All of those things are a privacy trade-off. But this is a transaction, right? It's a similar transaction to any paid service for, as you used to be, the mapping services like MapQuest or TomTom.
Yeah.
This is, people pay for those services, or you can get it from Google for free. But in exchange, you're saying, Google, you can have my location anonymously for free.
Right. And it's an interesting challenge. I always tend to argue things in a slightly different angle, which is, okay, let's look at privacy seriously, and let's just take a typical activity, for example, something you buy off Amazon. Okay, when you buy something from Amazon and yourself and pretty much no one else knows that you've bought that item. Amazon obviously know because you bought it from them. And maybe the retailer on Amazon if it wasn't bought directly. Okay, let's take another example. Let's take your photos. You take a photo of a hat, and then it's in your photo album. Now, it depends who you're talking about, because if you talk about Google, that analysis of whether that picture has a hat or not is done in the cloud. So they do that analysis in the cloud. And on Apple, it's done on device, because what they do there is they have models of what objects looks like loaded into the Apple device, and then they have a dedicated sort of algorithmic sort of AI chip that actually does that processing.
There's also specific RAM, isn't there? There's specific parts of the RAM that's dedicated to machine learning.
Exactly, and those are relatively secure. Those ones that are on the device, and so in both cases, the Google and Apple are not aware that A, the photo is yours, and B, that it contains a hat. A machine is aware of that. Okay. And it's this common misconception that, Google can see all my photos. Actually, no, they can't. They store that information in an encrypted manner, and the only thing that actually has access to that photo is the processing capability. So the computer that decides to process your photo can see that photo, but it doesn't have eyes. It doesn't see like your face and go, "Ooh, hello, this is Tim." What it sees is a bunch of numbers, a bunch of pixels, and then it processes that in that similar way. So when you type hat, Google doesn't see a picture of a hat. It sees a bunch of ones and zeros. Okay. And so I'm not trying to obfuscate the sort of concern here. I'm not trying to sort of sidestep it at all, but I'm just trying to highlight that the thing you should be more worried about is actually how secure is that data, right? So if Google is doing all that stuff, that's fine. But if that data isn't held securely, then it is easy for an actual human being to reverse engineer that information and steal it, and then take a look at something that is actually sensitive. And so people get too drawn into Facebook's listening to me, or Google's looking at my photos. It's like, trust me, these companies have no interest whatsoever in looking at your one photo of a hat. What they care more about is how your one bit of data aggregates to 1,000 users that they can call a middle-aged man in his 30s or whatever, who buys a lot of technology. That's what they care about. They care about the demographic. And we get too drawn into like worrying that someone in a computer somewhere is literally a human being is looking at our photos, and that just doesn't work at the scale these guys are operating at. They just don't have, literally, they don't have the time to look at the millions and billions of photos we're uploading on a daily basis to those services.
Agreed. So tell me more about the vegan pizza experiment we did on Friday.
So I've still been shouting vegan pizza into my phone because it drives me up the wall when people say, oh my God, Facebook's been listening to me. I saw this ad on Instagram and I swear I hadn't typed it into my phone or anything. But then suddenly I got home and I opened Facebook and there it is. It's an advert about vegan pizza.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, fine. Let me indulge this for a little bit. Instagram, I use Instagram. It has access to my microphone because I record videos on Instagram. So therefore it has to have access on my microphone. So I open up Instagram, and for the last 48 hours, I have actually genuinely been still saying vegan pizza to my phone to try and see if I get any advert whatsoever that even A, has a pizza in it, B, is a vegan pizza. Okay. And now we are 48 hours into it. I've seen nothing. Wow. And what I try and tell people is this: listen, I know it seems impossible to just fathom this concept that, there's no other way that they could have, found out this information about you without listening to you, because, humans have this capability to do pattern recognition, right? You see something, you notice it, and then you don't stop seeing it again and again and again. And so in this particular case, especially privacy, which is very abstract, we don't understand the data and how it comes from into our phone. So we see phone in our hand, we see an app, we open app, and then we see that it's got the ability to use the microphone. So we think, oh, the connection here must be that it's always using the microphone, even when the phone is off. And it's like, well, no, Apple doesn't let them do that. Like, just number one. And number two, let's assume they even do that. Again, that's not the kind of data they need to process that advert or whatever. What they actually care about is your behaviors. What behaviors did you trigger before you bought that vegan pizza? Because that is what they then use to figure out what other people might be doing to go buy that vegan pizza. They don't literally take your microphone recording. And so these companies have gotten creepily good at using data to do this. A simple example is this. I have a friend who was ill, okay? And they swore on earth that they didn't mention anything on any social media platform. They don't have Facebook. They don't have Instagram. They just use Twitter. And what they said was, I don't understand how my friend saw an advert for a cold and flu when A, they weren't ill, but B, I was. Okay. I was like, okay, come on here. Come on. Okay. So I was like, okay, all right, fine. So I just asked a couple of questions. I was like, okay, so do you live with your friend? Are they a housemate? Yes. Okay. Well, let me explain that to you. You have your phone. It connects to a Wi-Fi router. Your Wi-Fi router has a unique MAC address. Yeah? That MAC address is unique. So 4 of you connect to that. Facebook already knows you all live in the same property. So it's showing your friend an advert for a flu, even though he doesn't have one, because it's figured out that someone in the property is ill. And so therefore it might as well just show ads to everyone in the house before they all get ill. This is literally how Facebook and so on and Google work.
Agreed.
This is just how they work.
I've got a good tidbit about that. So when I went to university, this is when Facebook, everyone used Facebook. Nowadays, people are like, I'm not on Facebook anymore, and sort of get on their get on their high horse about exactly
owned by Facebook.
WhatsApp and Instagram and all this stuff. But anyway, this is when everyone was on Facebook, and he was telling me like, oh yeah, so got to university, so he went to one close to where I live, and he was like, yeah, so we all got in, and then he was like, within by the evening of my first day that I'd logged in, I opened up Facebook. And my suggested friends, all of them were my flatmates. I never actually, I didn't add any of them. None of them added me. But the suggested one was my flatmate. So I was like, right. I was like, are you on the same network? Yes. There we go. Like,
that's
simple. Done.
Next.
Yeah, next. Exactly. It's stuff like that. And it's just like that confirmation bias. I think also the second one was how Google can help hospitals predict flu outbreaks.
Right.
Because when people start searching for flu symptoms, it's then able to do that. Now, there's a great article by a guy called Danny Page about how people should stop using Google Trends because it's a common baseline. It's based on a 0 to 100 scale, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, they do that deliberately, yeah.
Of course, because that's literally, you pay for Google Trends and AdWords for that information. Anyway, so there are good things that come out of having these things shared. And I think because of the volume of internet browsing that goes on, as you say, a company will not care that a guy in his mid-20s ordered a pizza and said, oh my God, I'm so excited about ordering a pizza out loud. right? Like that just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
And it's also computationally expensive to process that. Imagine
Correct.
getting an audio clip. Like the Google here can barely understand when I say, Google, do this, and it's like, oh, okay, I started a timer. It's like, no, you got that wrong. Like,
exactly.
Why would adverts be working any better than that?
On top of that, I remember speaking to a software company about, I was like, I think this was when I worked in Manchester, and I was like, why is, like, I clearly use your software. I log into Twitter at work, and I'm given an advert saying, hey, maybe you should start using this market research company. And I was like, but like, surely how dumb is your advert that is picking me out? Right.
Right. I know who you're talking about here,
yeah. And the guy was like, you know what? Do you know how much that costs? That advert costs me £2 a month. Now, if of the 1 million, 2 million, 5 million people that see that advert that have been profiled, then say, yep, I'm going to buy that, that's 15 grand.
Right.
Done. Sold. And it's like
return on investment.
Return on
ding,
investment,
ding,
like it's nothing. Like I can now funnel as much money as I want into those adverts because I've made one sale off that advert, etc., etc. Exactly. So it's things like that. It's things like that play into it, right? And yes, there are. And if the privacy is a concern, there are now so many VPN services you can buy as a subscription to get that out, right? So you're then able to protect yourself if you so want to.
And what will happen is, VPN is currently a service. Soon, ISPs will incorporate that into their delivery, and it'll just be another value add system. Although you
almost get to a point where internet service providers will offer that as hey, we'll give you this for free. Similar to how you have energy providers now saying all of our energy comes from 100% renewable.
Right. It's like, is it there?
Yeah, right. And there's no way for me checking, but I feel ethically better about that, right? So
I feel better, yeah. You and I feel better about it. And so this privacy thing is a really big thing. I think everyone can do a little bit more to educate themselves on sort of the ethics around data. We spoke a bit about that last week. They can do themselves some good, just understanding the levels of privacy that they can reasonably expect from technology companies, given the interactions they have with non-technological companies. I go to my GP, I have a heart attack when I see them writing everything on paper because I'm like, damn, there's actually, my information is physically available. All you need is access to that filing cabinet. And I know where that filing cabinet is, right? Yeah. Whereas I can't tell you where on earth the Google server is that has my 90,000 photos. That's just not information that's readily available. Neither can Google.
And yet, so we talk about Internet of Things. So the other thing this is a huge thing in America, smart locks. I am just like, man, that's so bad. Like, imagine having a smart lock, you'd be locked out of your house, blah, blah, blah. Like, imagine if your Wi-Fi goes down, all this stuff. But conversely, the alternate route of, if you've forgotten your keys, is putting it in one of those hidden rock pebble things. Or like a 4 combination lock you get at the Airbnb you stay in.
Under a plant outside of your home.
Right. And it's just like, man, what's more secure? What is currently more secure at all, right? And similarly, the trade-off of, people, if you tell someone, all your information is stored in the cloud, they're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. I was like, well, it's that, or we put it in the hospital that could burn down. Someone could break in, copy, falsify your records by pen. All of these different things.
So many sort of things that we already fine with today, but we're suddenly not fine with when it's made into
someone else does it.
Yeah, when someone else, or more importantly, when the terms Google or Facebook come up. It's funny, if it wasn't Google, Facebook, Apple, or Amazon, I think people would be happy. I think those companies just have an inherent amount of power in so many different places that they've developed mistrust. And they've also screwed up in some cases. They generally have made really bad faux pas. I think the most recent one for Google was, it came out a couple of weeks ago, that back in December of last year, there was a brief period where when someone downloaded photos from Google Photos, they might not have got just their photos. They could have also got photos that belonged to other people. Okay. But, and here's the big but, someone messed up at Google, and people mess up every day. But if you go into an Apple store and you go to the Genius Bar and you see the amount of people every single day that are crying, if you see the amount of people every single time I go in that are crying because they've forgotten their password to their iCloud backup and they've lost all their photos, right? All their photos that were on their phone because they had them backed up nowhere else. It's a mistake on exactly the same kind of level. And yet people can't equate these things. Yet it's still a human being building these things. And so Google makes one mistake in a decade of photo services, right? But people make mistakes every day that lead to much worse consequences. Much worse. But
that's exactly it. Is it your problem, Tim, or is it their problem? If I can stand on top of my hill and have my holier than thou approach of being like, well, I didn't screw up, they screwed up, and they're a massive company, they can't screw up. it's that holier than thou approach that will always continue to win in these scenarios.
Well, the thing
Rightly
is,
or wrongly.
I put my data in Google, and I expect them to not screw up. I expect them to be better at it than me.
Exactly.
However,
Absolutely.
however, however, and here's a big but: I don't just trust them with my photos. I trust multiple people with the photos. I trust Apple, I trust Google, and I trust Backblaze to keep my photos safe, right?
Mhm.
And when I keep those photos in those places, I make sure that my Google account has two-factor authentication, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just a really simple thing. So I am personally maybe knowledgeable, so I know these things, and so you could argue Google could do a better job of educating their users. But go ahead, go grab my photos off the Google server. You're still not going to be able to look at them because they're encrypted
But
at source.
this is already a thing though. This is already a thing though. Like the people that are there are people that are educating users. Like this is what banks are doing right now. Like the Barclays Eagles thing. So Barclays banking in the
Right,
UK.
right.
They've pivoted to well, actually, it is partially our responsibility to train our users. That our bankers, our customers should have that digital nuance to know what's a phishing email and what isn't. Whether
Yeah.
a prince from Africa is actually contacting me, and all those different things are, they're education pieces.
My critique to those things on TV is like, when's the last someone ever remembered an advert in detail on TV, right?
Right, true.
So it's lip service. It's like, look at us, we're a good bank, we're helping customers, we run all these academies. And okay, yes, they do actually do some digital academies for people, and they do
Mhm.
in-person stuff at branches, but like really like the best place to do this kind of stuff is at source, right? So when you're uploading a photo, that's the time to tell you, okay, here's what could happen. But they don't do that because they don't want you to not use the service. They want you to have this rosy picture of the world that everything's fine, it's all good, nothing will ever happen. And broadly speaking, nothing does ever happen. And even if the mistake, it doesn't impact everyone, impacts a small minority. But there's some cases where that's a matter of life and death. Literally. If you go to Nigeria and you are able to get into someone's photo album and you find that they are gay or lesbian, that's a life-threatening situation for that individual. Whereas in Western world, we just laugh it off and go, oh well, it's the sun, they just got access to the photo.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's very blasé about it, but in
yeah,
many
exactly.
cases
it is literally it's such an important piece to be aware of.
Absolutely.
And for those countries, it's almost like we can't, because the government will get access to this information and use it for good or evil. Because it could happen here, it could happen in the US, it could happen in the
anywhere.
West.
It can happen anywhere.
And those are very real things to be aware of. Absolutely.
Yeah, and concerned. And so everyone can do a better job of educating everyone else on privacy and data security. I try and help my parents with their password. My mum writes her passwords in a book, and I'm like, oh man. So recently we got rid of this book. That's why I'm saying it here, otherwise I haven't helped her out at all. And they're all in like a nice secure system that now keeps them everywhere, and she never forgets a password, which is perfect. Really simple thing, like have someone else's email as a backup email for something that is pivotal, like your Google account. The only Google account you have the backup email be the email of your girlfriend or the email of a friend, because then that way, if you set it to backup email to be, I don't know, some Hotmail email that you haven't used in like 3 years, right? The moment something really bad happens, you're going to wish you did use like some weird email that you haven't used in a while. And you can actually just go to your friend and say, hey, I've forgotten this. You're going to get an email. Can you let me into my account? People you trust, that's the best form of security.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right. Which is why stuff like Amigo loans have come back into play. Like, guarantee your loan by a friend, not by a bank.
God, we started an internet of lots of things, and now we've ended up with payday loans. Honestly,
what a journey!
Some topic drift of epic proportions. But yeah, I think we have an episode there. I think these are all topics to be broadly aware of. I'm really keen and excited to see where I think 5G won't be big this year. I think the iPhone this year will be the 5G device that really kicks everything off. I know loads of phone networks in the UK already have 5G.
Apple tags.
Yeah, absolutely. Apple tags. Those are already possible with Tiles. I mean, I've been using Tile now for 2 years. That thing has literally revolutionized my life. I never lose my keys. It's just impossible. I can't.
But this is it, right? Like touchscreen phones already existed before the iPhone.
Exactly. It's just the way they're done. Very, exactly. Very, very true. Oh man, we can talk about that topic another time. I was about to go off on a rant.
Well, there's two topics that I think have come up. We can talk about big companies like Amazon and Facebook and Google.
Yeah, we can revisit those. Yeah,
with the responsibility they have to their users, and also this, like, the innovator's dilemma of sorts. Right. Like, who if is the first mover always the best? Right. I remember seeing the first Apple Watch and the first iPad, being like, no, no chance. And here I am. I've got an Apple Watch, and I'm probably going to buy an iPad at some point. So it's all about is the first iteration there or is it not, right?
I have to be honest. Every so often, someone comes up to me because they know I'm an iPhone lover, right? And they go up to me and go, "Oh, I ditched my iPhone. I'm using Android. Look how much better it is." And they go
2 years
through
later.
this. No. They go through this like process of telling me how much better it is, and I'm just looking over their shoulder, looking at what they're showing me, and I'm like, not convinced. Not convinced. And the same with someone who switches from Android to Apple, or Apple to Android. The same thing happens in both directions, right?
Absolutely.
Android user would look at an iPhone user and go, yeah, not convinced. It's just a preference thing. It's just a preference thing.
100%.
Okay, that's it. That's been a great show. You can find our show notes up on datumpodcast.com. Reach out to us on Twitter at datumpod, and you can find these episodes on pretty much any podcast player you want: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast. Yes, I'll be adding a little Spotify button to the website for those of you who highlighted to me that I don't have Spotify there.
We got a question on Friday, like, "Oh man, you should put your podcast on Spotify." And we're like, but it is.
It already is. It already is. There. In fact, we have 50 listeners on Spotify already. So get involved, and we'll catch you in the next episode in a couple of weeks' time.
Excellent. Take care, everyone.